What's up, guys? Welcome back to another Fish the Moment live stream. Alright, to see a bunch of guys already on, chatting up in the comments. Good to see everyone as always, and we got a pretty awesome live stream today for you guys. And for everyone who's just joining on for the first time, this is my live stream format where I break down lakes on Navionics and Google Earth that my Patreon subscribers submit so that I can break down their lakes by different seasons and show you which spots to fish. So if this is the first video you're ever seeing from me, I would recommend going down to my channel and checking out some of my shorter form videos where I break down the different types of patterns or techniques that you need to become a better bass fisherman in a shorter format and maybe a little bit easier to digest than 1 hour of me talking about Navionics and Google Earth. So again, if this is your first video, go check out my channel down below and probably be a little bit easier introduction to stuff. But for everyone who's here to see all the lake breakdowns and to join the stream, excited to get into it today and got a really awesome selection of lakes. So first up, we're going to start with a kind of overview of the pre-spawn season. Again, we've been doing that on every stream so far, but I just want to kind of make sure we keep going over that so everyone's on the same page. And then we're going to talk about pre-spawn locations on 3 different lakes that are very different in the way they set up and their size in parts of the country, everything. So first up, we'll be starting on Lake Seminole in Georgia, where they just fished an FLW Costa series, and so I have a tiny bit of intel at least on how the fish are biting out there and some good places to fish. The Bassmasters have fished out there for several years, going back all the way to 2003. And then you have Richard B. Russell Reservoir, which we'll be looking at about halfway through the stream, and that's in South Carolina, and that's wedged right between Lake Hartwell and another one of those really deep, clear reservoirs down there in South Carolina. And so we have some really deep, clear fisheries to look at today, plus the shallow, dirty water fisheries like Lake Seminole and then Lake Sardis in Oklahoma, which is a small little lake in Oklahoma, really dirty, really shallow, so it should be pretty good for all those guys who have the little lakes that are pretty dirty right now from all the rain that we've been having around the country. So pretty excited to start the stream. Got 118 people already on, and got all the regulars on already commenting. How's it going? Thomas, Nicholas, Rodney, Scott, we got the other Scott, we got Mike, Dean, Derek, Austin, Clint, Mike. How's it going, everybody? JT, good to see you back on the stream. Missed you last week, bud. And a bunch of other people, Anthony, Larry, ton of guys on. So really excited to start getting in these lakes. And for everyone who's wanting to ask questions and stuff, just leave them in the chat. If you're looking on your phone or on your computer, there should be a little chat box on your phone where you can actually click on there and interact. It's really fun to see everyone commenting and talking in the stream. And then on top of that, I can go through and try to answer your comments throughout the stream. And then I'll also be doing a Q&A at the very end of the stream for about 15 minutes, where I'll go through as many questions as I can. So hopefully we'll be able to get through everyone's questions, and hopefully y'all enjoy the stream. So I'm going to jump straight into an overview of the pre-spawn real quick, and then we'll get right into the lakes. So first up, we have an overview of all the different seasons. So again, if this is your first time checking out the stream or you're pretty new to bass fishing, normally fishermen break up a fishing season into the spring, summer, fall, and winter, and they further divide those seasons into the seasons you see on the screen. And so today we're going to be focusing specifically on the pre-spawn, which is a time of year that, if we look right here, is between the late winter and the spawn periods. And normally water temperatures are going to be between 50 and 60 degrees on your lakes when your fish are getting in that pre-spawn pattern. And a lot of times that water temperature can vary because sometimes the water temperatures on your lake may never get below 50 degrees. But normally, if your water temperatures are getting into the 50s and they've dropped down to the 50s and they're starting to warm back up to the 60-degree range, you know you're in that pre-spawn pattern. So it's basically when water temperatures are warming back up to that 60-degree range, whether they start at 30 degrees or they start at 55 degrees. And so that's the pre-spawn pattern, and it's a really fun time of the year to go out and catch a bunch of big bass, and the fish are actually really predictable this time of year. So I do want to walk through a couple different lakes today with you guys to show you the different varieties of patterns, areas, and techniques you can use to catch these pre-spawn bass around the country. So that's a pretty quick overview right away. Pretty Easy stuff right there. And so I'm going to now jump straight into our first lake, which is Lake Seminole in Georgia. Here we go. So first up, we got Lake Seminole in Georgia, which is a legendary fishery, and it's pretty much on the border of Florida and Georgia. And there's some giant bass in this lake. And the Bassmaster Elite Series fished out there in 2017, I believe, and Brett Height won that fishing a chatterbait on the main lake. And then there's been a lot of other tournaments over the years. I think Gary Klein won a tournament out here in 2003. I think it was Gary Klein. He was fishing up in some of the backwaters in here, flipping. And then, there's been a lot of our tournaments fished up there recently, like the FLW Costa Series. And I think I know where the guy was catching his fish in that tournament, or at least I have a couple areas narrowed down. So what I want to do is kind of walk you through the different areas of Lake Seminole and show you where I would be fishing if I had to go out here on the pre-spawn and, the type of areas that I think would be good. So first up, if we kind of look at Lake Seminole, we have three different kind of river arms. And so we have a nice river arm up here. We have another kind of big major river or creek on this side, and then another one over here. And there's a ton of shallow, flooded backwaters these guys can go in and fish. So if we look in here, you can see there's lily pad trails where you have these like backwater ponds that are covered in lily pads. There's some clear water, and they wind all through up in here pretty much as far as the eye can see. You have some of the creeks and stuff and some smaller pockets back in here where these bass are potentially going to spawn. And then you have some major ponds that these fish will get in where the water's a lot clearer. You have some boat docks and stuff as well. These are really popular when you have tournaments. They also get very crowded when you have tournaments. And so a lot of guys try to stay out of these areas, especially if it's a multi-day tournament, because they get really heavily pressured. And then as we move further over to the west side of the lake, again, you have lots of backwaters you can get into, lots of shallow boat lanes and lily pads where people will take their boats. There's also just shallow places these bass can spawn, pre-spawn in, all kinds of stuff. And so I'm just kind of moving up and down this lake so you can kind of see so much water to cover. And so I get a lot of questions a lot of times. I'm like, how do you know where to start when you have a lake that looks so good? There's cover and just stuff everywhere. You have lily pads everywhere, brush, creek channels, everything you could ever ask for. How do I start, figure out where I want to fish? Well, the first thing I'm going to do when I'm fishing the pre-spawn is I want to see where those bass are going to be spawning. And normally one of the key things you want to look for in the spawn when you want to see if fish are spawning there is whether the area has clear water. And you can easily tell if the water is clear in your area using Google Earth by just looking at the color of the water. You'll see here on the main lake, it's very dirty. It has like a brown or a dark green tint to it. And as you move further back into some of these ponds, you can see the water gets a lot darker. It almost becomes black. And these are the type of areas that the bass are going to want to spawn in, because that clear water helps get more sunlight to the eggs, helps them grow, and the clear water also is just better habitat for the fish in general. And so bass love to get around the clearer water in these ponds. And there's also some clear water back in some of these, shallow backwaters back up in here because of the shallow vegetation that they have back in these little pockets. So anytime you have grass, hydrilla, or lily pads, a lot of times that will clear up the water. Maybe not as much lily pads, but a lot of times like the hydrilla and stuff. And so you can see right here, you have some nice clear water leading into this backwater that these fish can spawn in, and then the water gets progressively dirtier as you move out to the main lake. And so there's a lot of places that you can check now that have clear water, but you can also eliminate a lot of the lake because it doesn't have clear water. And then as you continue to look around the lake, you can see, okay, even out here on the main lake, there's some areas that have clearer water because there's some shallow grass on some of these flats. And so this grass and these little flats are kind of protecting some of these areas back in here from the main river current and from places like that. So you also have some places these fish could spawn out on the main lake out here. So again, so many possibilities, so many options to check out when you go to a lake like this. And so what I normally like to do is try to focus on the section of the lake that looks the easiest to maneuver around in and the easiest to fish, because I like to fish a lot of spots in a given day. I don't like to bunker down in like one of these little ponds and just sit there all day and have 7 boats driving around me all day. That's just not my style. You can work, and one of the guys who actually won on the FLW Costa Series, I think he was fishing in one of these ponds in here, or maybe it was this pond. It was one of these 3 big ponds, I believe. And the reason I say it is because you could see that he was fishing by some of these boat docks and stuff like that out here. And I think that he was fishing either back in one of these ponds. He may have also been out in the main lake. I'm not 100% sure, but he was fishing in front of some boat docks. So the air spot I thought he might be let's see here. He might be down like one of these stretches of boat docks, something like this. So I'm thinking he's either down this stretch of boat docks right here, and I'm thinking like this is the area where he caught his fish, or he was fishing back in one of these ponds. Can't really decipher it, but really what he was focused on was fishing the outside edge of some of this grass and around some of this standing timber. And so what he was fishing was a Carolina rig, and he was putting his boat out here, out in front of some of these boat docks, and these fish are going to want to move up and spawn on these boat docks, around these boat docks, in the lily pad stems, around the shallow grass. And he found a group of fish that was sitting out in the intermediate area, not super deep out here in the center of these pockets where you have the deeper water, 10, 15, 20 feet. They were sitting out in between where you have these shallow docks in the grass and this deep water. And so if we switch over to Navionics, over here, give me 1 second here, switch over to Navionics. You can go back on one of these backwaters. You can see kind of what he was looking at. So if you look at that bank I was looking at right here, where those boat docks are, here's a potential area that he may have been fishing. You can see here you have a nice little ditch that winds into these docks. And you can see it's a ditch because it has some deeper water that funnels in on both sides, and it's surrounded by shallow water on both sides. So this little ditch here is a great place for pre-spawn bass to set up, because they can, if there's grass down here in the center of this ditch and 4, 5, 6 feet of water, when it's cold, you get cold fronts, you get a north wind, those fish can pull into this little ditch. But then right when that water starts to warm up, they can move straight up to this bank to spawn. And so it gives them that deep depression to protect them from the cold weather, and then it gives them the shallow water where they can actually move up to spawn. So that's where the potential spot was where he was fishing during the tournament. The other potential area that I thought he might be fishing is somewhere off of one of these points out here. And as you can see, there's actually a nice little creek channel swing that swings in against this. And one place I thought he might be fishing is kind of down one of these banks on the main lake, closer to one of these main river channels. And this is kind of where the bass like to spawn. And you can see that or not spawn, but where they like to winter, And they like to winter out here because you have 22, 23, 24 feet of water on the main lake. But it's also a great place for them to stage to spawn, because they can actually move up and spawn down these boat docks, and they can stage up on a point like this point right here, where they can set up and drop into the creek channel when it's cold, drop into this creek channel when it's cold, but they want to move up to feed up for the spawn. They can pull up on this little point right here, and they can also pull up on maybe this little ridge right here. You can see there's a little, or not a ridge, but a little kick out. There's almost like a depression that winds in here, and it kicks out to a flatter area. They could sit right in here. They could also sit right in this little depression that winds in here. And again, he's trying to fish grass, underwater grass. That's a great place to catch pre-spawn bass, because that grass will hold heat and also will hold forage, because you'll have little shad, little bluegill, stuff like that like to sit in the grass. And when the days warm up, you get 7, 8, 9 days of warm weather in a row. Those fish will pull up out of this creek channel that we have right here, pull up on the edge of this grass. They'll start feeding up. And then right when that water temperature hits 58 to 62 degrees, those bass will move straight up to the bank, and they're going to start feeding up on some of these staging areas in that grass that's a little bit off the bank. And that's how the guy who won the Costa Series was fishing this last weekend. And he was catching them on Carolina rig. You can also catch him on a jig, lipless crankbaits, square bill crankbaits, depending on how deep the water is. No problem fishing any of those baits. And then if we switch back over to Google Earth, another way that I remember watching a tournament out here in 2003, and Gary Klein was crushing them out here in kind of a similar pre-spawn deal, but instead of fishing on that offshore kind of out in front of these docks areas, he was actually trying to go back, and let me try to find an area that's like this, but he was running back into some of these backwater areas, and he was actually flipping some of the more matted grass that was back up in some of these areas. And so if we look, let me pull up this image and pull it up a little bit further up. Give me 1 second. See here, I need to find an area. I didn't have one found beforehand. I thought I'd be able to find one pretty quick. Sometimes I'm always overestimating how easy it is to find all these really good areas. But give me just half a second to find one. Okay, here we go. So basically what he would do is he would get in these areas back up in here, and he would find some shallower grass that's matted, like this grass right here. So you can see there's actually some lily pads that are down this edge, but he was trying to find this type of grass, this like hay grass right here. It almost is like a little bit thicker, it's a little more matted, and these fish will get in like these lily pads and these drains. So they'll get in this type of drain right here, or a little ditch, and they'll set up in these. You can catch them on chatterbaits, spinnerbaits, down in these ditches in the pre-spawn, in these lily pads. But this is really good when the water's warming up and you get 55, 56, 57 degree water temperatures. The water's warming up and those fish are getting active. But when you get a cold front, and the cold front comes through, which it always happens in this pre-spawn, the cold front will knock the temperatures down, and those fish want to get around the thickest grass they can find. And that's what happened during that tournament in 2003. It was like April, but the water temperatures dropped from a sudden cold front, and Gary was catching fish on stretches of these small stretches of grass that had this hay grass. And I wish I could pull up a image of exactly what he was looking at, but basically he was fishing some of this thicker matted grass, all this stuff, like this stuff right up in here, that's a lot thicker. It's not the sparse lily pads like we're seeing over here and that we saw on the other parts of the lake. It's really this thick grass like right in here. And the best grass he was fishing was close to a creek channel. And so if you look at this grass right here, you have a nice little creek channel. You can actually even see it without pulling up Navionics, where the creek channel swings in, and it swings in really close to this matted grass. And these bass love to get on these stretches of grass because they'll sit here in the wintertime, but then they can pull up and get up here, and they can actually spawn all the way up in this stuff. But then when that cold front hits, maybe instead of spreading out all around in this area where you have that shallower water all the way back into this stuff, even over here, those fish will actually kind of suck in to some of the deeper stretches of banks close to these creek channels because there's a little bit more security with that deeper water, and they can pull right onto these deeper stretches of grass. And you'll take a big heavy weight of 3/4 ounce of 1 ounce weight on a like a flipping hook, and you'll throw a beaver style bait or a little like cross style bait, punch it into the grass, and fish big heavy line, 80-pound floor or 80-pound braided line, stuff like that, and flip up in this type of grass. That's the sort of stuff that you can catch them really well on when you have those cold front conditions. And then, other than just the cold fronts and, trying to fish out in front, you can catch a lot of good fish on these lakes just trying to find areas where these bass are going to spawn. This is where kind of one of the areas that Brett Height was fishing and did really well in when he won that tournament a couple of years ago out on Lake Seminole. He was fishing a chatterbait out in front of some of these spawning pockets out on the main lake, and a lot of the guys in the tournament were catching fish really well way back up into these pockets where it would spawn, and they were finding fish, staging up to spawn way back in these creeks and stuff. But Brett kind of ignored that, and he stayed out on the main lake and focused on some of these main lake docks, some of this main lake grass that you see out here, even like some of the stuff that's further off the bank. And he was fishing a lipless or a chatterbait through this grass, catching those pre-spawn bass. Like maybe you see right here is a little bit of a ditch that winds in and feeds this creek. He may have been casting his chatterbait down in this little ditch, catching some fish. And it also showed that he was fishing some of these areas back up over here, kind of like we were showing earlier, and just fishing some of these main lake banks on the inside grass line. There's some grass that winds all the way up and down this kind of pocket in here, and he was catching some fish. Again, fishing that lipless crankbait, fishing a chatterbait, lipless crankbait, stuff like that in the grass in 4 to 6 feet of water, maybe all the way up to 2 to 3 feet of water on warm days. And then, catching those pre-spawn bass that all the pros were ignoring because they were all up shallow catching the spawning bass. So those are some ideas on Lake Seminole that you can use, and ideas that you can hopefully apply to your home lake when you find yourself in a situation where you have a lot of shallow vegetation, where you have a lot of vegetation that looks the same. Again, just look for those areas where you have that steeper banks, those steeper creek channels swinging in. Also look for areas that are in the mouths of the areas the bass are going to spawn and places where they can transition in, and you should be all set. So that was a lot of talking there. So I want to now go and read through some of the comments, see what you guys are talking about, and then hopefully we can switch over to the next lake and continue our breakdowns. So let's see here. All people are talking about electronics. I can get into electronics later on, guys, if you want at the end. I don't know if I have the best opinions because all my electronics are super old. My best graph is my Onyx 10, which is a really nice graph, but I got it when it was 4 years old, 2 years ago, so it's like 6 years old now. And then my Hummingbird 998 is like 9 years old now, so don't have the nicest graphs, but I love graphing around, and I still do really well with it. So you can still get older graphs at a pretty steep discount that still do a really good job. But anyways, we got a ton of questions. I don't know if I'll be able to get through all this. I'm going to run through all these questions again later on after the stream on kind of go through. Oh, Austin's got one. How do you keep a boat steady on point in the wind? So Austin Simpson's asking, how do you keep a boat on point in the wind? And thank you again, Austin, for putting @fish the moment and putting the multiple question marks. That's the best way to get me to actually look at one of your questions. If you have a specific question, go to put @fish the moment and then put a bunch of question marks at the end. That's the way you can get my attention the best. And so, Austin, what I would like to do, or what I do when I try to keep my boat pointed into the wind, or when I try to keep my boat steady in the wind, is point the nose of my boat directly into the wind. And so if the wind's blowing from the north, I want to put the nose of my boat directly north into that wind so that I can control my boat. And a lot of times what will happen is that, let's say I'm fishing a ditch right here. So we have this little ditch I was talking about, and the wind is blowing directly from the north. And the spot I want to fish is right here. Let's say it's this little spot. I'll drop a pin and I'll show you. So let's say we want to fish this spot right here. And the wind's blowing directly from the north. Well, it's really easy in that case because all I have to do is put my boat on the south side of this point and then cast and point my boat directly, the nose of my boat directly into the wind from the north, and then just cast straight across this spot, no problem. But then let's say I was fishing and the wind shifted from the east. Well, instead of putting my boat positioned to the south of this little area, I would put it over here on the west side and then point my boat directly into that wind and then make some casts across that. And that works really well most of the time, except for when you're actually fishing on a specific ledge or someplace where you can't fish on both sides of the cover. And so I'll show you what I'm talking about real quick. Transition over to Navionics. So we got Navionics right here. So let's say that we're fishing, I don't know if there's actually fish that's on like these ledges and stuff, but let's say we're fishing this ledge right here. And there's a school of fish that's set up right on this point right here. Well, a lot of times, you'll want to keep your boat out in deeper water and cast up into shallower water, especially in the summertime. That's the best way to retrieve your bait because these fish are sitting up on top of this ledge. You don't want to put your boat up on the shallow water and then cast over the ledge and bring it back because you have a chance of spooking the fish because all those fish in the summer when they're actively feeding will position on top of this ledge. So if the wind is blowing directly from the south and my boat is sitting right here and the fish are right here, if I put my nose of my boat at the fish, like point my nose of the boat directly at the fish, what will happen is that south wind will blow my boat directly onto that spot on top of that ledge. So what I actually do is turn the boat around and I make the nose of my boat point south directly into the wind and I cast behind my boat. And it kind of looks a little bit weird because you're pointing your boat directly away from the fish. The nose of your boat's pointing south, the fish are to the north. But if you cast directly behind your boat, you can maintain control of your boat in the wind, no problem, and then cast directly on to that ledge, that school of fish, no problem. And same goes if you have an east wind or a west wind, just put your boat right opposite the wind and then put the nose of the boat directly into the wind, and you should be good to go. And then all the guys who are probably in the comments right now saying, get spot lock or get power poles. Yes, that's also another really good option, but they both cost a lot of money and I don't have either. So That's Joshua says, do you use spot lock to keep your boat steady? I haven't dropped 2 grand on spot lock, and I haven't dropped 2 or 3 or 4 grand on getting 2 power poles. So unfortunately, no. I have to do old school, but it works really well for me, no problem. I've been doing it for years, and I'm pretty used to it. So you could definitely get it done without buying all of that expensive stuff. So, anyways, I'm going to jump over now to the next lake. And I did see over here we got Bassing with Class. My first bass fishing tournament is coming up. Any suggestions? I could definitely get into some tournament suggestions in a little bit at the end of the stream. So just keep staying on Bassing with Class and we can talk about tournament ideas because I got a lot of tournament experience, fished over 150 tournaments in my life, so especially junior tournaments and stuff. So it could definitely help you out there. So we switch over now to our next lake, which is Richard B. Russell in South Carolina. Okay, flying over here to Richard B. Russell. So this is a super deep, clear reservoir in South Carolina. And if we switch over actually to Navionics, that'd probably be a good place to start. Transition over here so we can kind of see some of the contour lines. Transition it. Richard B. Russell is sandwiched between Clarks Hill Reservoir and Hartwell Lake. So Lake Hartwell. Bassmaster Classic was out here several times, and then Clarks Hill has been the home to several different Bassmaster Elite Series events, and so really two really famous reservoirs, but Richard B. Russell doesn't get a lot of love between having those two great fisheries sandwiched between it. So basically, with that being said, this lake probably gets a little bit less pressure than those other two lakes, so it may actually be a little bit easier to catch fish, though it may not have the size and the quantity of fish. I'm not really sure on that. But one thing that's nice is that I actually do have a lot of breakdowns on some South Carolina lakes, and I do have breakdowns on the Bassmaster Classic from last year on Lake Hartwell, which was a pre-spawn tournament. And so if you do want to check this out, let's see who actually submitted this. We have Michael Secrest suggested Richard B. Russell Reservoir on my Patreon page, and then Calvin Troop was the guy who submitted the Lake Seminole for the breakdown. And so thank you, both of you, for joining my Patreon page, recommending the lake on there. And for those of you who don't know how to get your lake put on the live stream, I basically have a Patreon page, which is over here in the bottom right corner, and you can go join the page, donate to the channel, and have a chance to have your lake put into this live stream to be looked at every single week. And so I'll put a poll up on the page, and you can go in there and just put your lake down for one of the lakes that can be in the random drawing each week. I randomly draw out the lakes, and then your lake gets shown on the stream. So definitely check out my Patreon page if you haven't already. There's a lot of other good benefits to joining on there as well, like suggesting video topics and getting access to any of the new services and new content I'm bringing out. So definitely check that out. But other than that, let's switch back over here to Richard B. Russell Lake. And so, as you can see, you have some, again, kind of like 3 river arms. You have the really big long arm up here that goes up to the northeast. You have another big long arm that actually feeds to the bottom of Lake Hartwell, and then another over here to the west. And the dam area here is very deep. I'm assuming the lake is super clear. If we actually switch it back over to Google Earth, you can see 126 feet of water right there from the Navionics view. And then if we actually zoom in here with Google Earth, and actually I'm going to take this lake back in time so we can get some of the clouds off the lake. Sometimes this lake can look a little bit cloudy. There we go. So you can see very dark water, meaning it's super clear. Looks very similar to Hartwell and Clarks Hill, which are on both sides of it. It has a lot of steep pockets, very deep water. And as you move further up the lake, you'll get a lot dirtier water. You can see this water up here is very brown and dirty. And you can see that there's a lot of really good rocky banks that these fish may be getting on, especially the largemouth, as the pre-spawn happens, which we'll talk about in a second. And then, down on the lower end, you probably have a lot of good spotted bass, potentially some really good largemouth as well that'll sit out here. And I'm assuming there's blueback herring in this reservoir, just because there are in Clarks Hill and Hartwell. And bass love to chase blueback herring on these South Carolina lakes. It basically is what they revolve their life around. And those herring like to stay out a little bit deeper on these deep, clear reservoirs. And so if I was fishing out here in Richard B. Russell in the pre-spawn, there's two patterns I would check out for sure. The first is I would check out the deep water bite on the main lake, and I would be looking for spotted bass and largemouth bass chasing blueback herring on the main lake. And so that's the first pattern that is a really good way to catch big bass, and it's probably one of the more consistent patterns. The second is actually running up the lake and trying to get in some of the dirtier water, fish around any riprap or rock banks, channel swing banks with a crankbait, maybe fishing a lipless crankbait up the river, or then as the water warms up into the mid to high 50s, fishing a chatterbait or a spinnerbait back up the river. And so we'll talk about how I would approach both those. And then the last thing I would do is actually a little sneaky pattern that works really well on these Hartwell lakes or these South Carolina lakes like Lake Hartwell this time of year. And that's running the very backs of pockets on the lower end of the lake where some shad and blueback herring will pull up in the morning. So I'll talk about that in a second too. But before I do that, I want to thank Bruce Clayton for the $50 super chat. I just wanted to thank you for the time. Your time doing this. I listen to these often later on various times, so even if I'm not watching, I'm always there. So thanks, Bruce. I appreciate all of the support for the channel and the live stream over the years. You're always commenting, always helping out with donations, so really appreciate that. And I appreciate everyone who's here watching. 230 you guys out here talking fishing nonstop in the chat and just listen to me blabber on about Navionics and Google Earth. You're my kind of guys, and I really appreciate all the support and just all the camaraderie and stuff. It's always awesome. It's sometimes tough being a bass nerd out there in a world of just normal fishermen who don't understand the power and awesomeness of Google Earth and Navionics. So always appreciate talking to you guys. But anyways, let's jump over to Navionics. And I want to show you that first pattern I talked about, which is the deep water bite on the main lake for those blueback herring bass. So again, kind of when you're looking for bass in the pre-spawn on a lake like a Lake Hartwell, a Richard B. Russell, or a Clark's Hill, is you want to find areas where these bass are going to spawn, and then you want to move out from those areas and follow the creek channels and the drains and the ditches. There's always creek channels, drains, or ditches on some of these deep, clear lakes. And so let's move over to like this pocket right here, I actually really like. So if we look at this pocket right here, you can see the contour lines are crazy on this lake. So many contour lines, which is great. Also just means it's very deep. And so if we look at this area right in here, you can see that there's some shallow pockets back up in here where these bass are going to want to spawn. And for everyone who doesn't know about how bass spawn, they love to spawn in shallower water, normally going to get less than 10 feet of water and spawn up on shallow banks. Normally, if the water clarity is 4 to 5 feet, they may spawn out as deep as 10 feet of water. If the water clarity is super dirty, like let's say a foot or less of visibility, or maybe even 2 feet or less of visibility, those fish will spawn up at 6 inches of water. So varies by lake, but in general, they want to spawn near the banks, near those shallower water. And before we go on, thanks so much for super chat, Zach Wright. I said Sheeran Harris, North Carolina. I think that's a lake. So I'll put you into the random drawing, Zach, for the super chat. I know sometimes people can't get onto the Patreon page, so I'll definitely throw that in to the drawing for the next lake breakdown. And got a few guys left who haven't had breakdowns chosen, so actually you may have a pretty good shot just because I'm trying to get through everyone first who hasn't had one yet on the Patreon page before I start repeating people. So I'm still randomly drawing, but the pool is getting smaller and smaller. So if you join Patreon now, your chances of getting actually on the breakdown are pretty good. So anyways, appreciate that, Zach. And then basically, like I was saying, these bass are going to be spawning down some of these shallower banks. And so the bass are going to want to get on these banks here to spawn, and so before they get there, they're going to be sitting out here on the main lake in the wintertime. And there's actually a really nice creek channel that swings into this pocket right here, and the bass are going to want to winter out here because there's really deep water. The herring, blueback herring, like to get out here in the deeper water. It's protected from the cold fronts and from the shocking cold weather you can get sometimes there in South Carolina. And so those fish are, just going to be hanging out here all winter. And then one more, Clint Hart. Thank you for the $20 super chat. Bruce just started off a avalanche of super chats. I'm definitely not complaining, but thank you guys so much for the support. Thank you, Clint. Always seeing you on the stream as well. So thank you for all of the support, comments, and just the donations, all that. Really appreciate that. So, anyways, we have the main lake, creek channels and stuff where these fish are going to winter. So basically what you have is you have this creek channel right here where the bass are going to sit all winter, and you have the shallow areas where these bass are going to spawn. And so all you have to do is look for areas where these bass could potentially feed between the deep water where they'll sit all winter and the shallow water where they're going to spawn. Because those fish are going to be, think about it, the fish are going to be sitting on beds for 2 to 3 weeks potentially, protecting their fry, spawning, and they need a lot of energy. So they're going to be feeding up as much as they can pre-spawn so that they can expel all that energy and use that food to kind of sustain them as they spawn. And places that you want to look for when bass are feeding are high spots, basically, which is anywhere where you can find the top of a point or the like a ledge. Here's a couple tops of some different points right here. You want to find maybe some ditches or drains that come in some deeper or some of these shallow flats. Like right here, we have a nice little ditch that goes right up against a point. So this is a ditch. Here's a point. And then, again, you have more of these shallow points that stick out here. All places where these bass can move up and feed when they're trying to get ready to ambush bait. Because what will happen is on cloudy days, windy days, the bait fish will move up on top of these points because plankton will move up there and the bait fish will start to feed. Then the bass will follow and feed up on top of these points where they'll ambush them. And so, this little point right here, it actually looks like a little ridge that sticks out, and there's a high spot right there. If there's any brush down there, you catch them on a drop shot, an underspin, a football jig. Those are really my 3 go-to baits if I was going to be fishing out here in South Carolina. And again, this little point right here is a great place for those fish to spawn, even this part of this point here. And then again, that little ditch. And then even as those fish start to move further back into these pockets, you may even be able to catch them on some of these steeper banks leading into these spawning bays on like a jerk bait or an Alabama rig or a Ned rig, stuff like that. And again, you can tell those banks are steeper because they have the contour lines coming really close together. And then the steep bank is a great place for those pre-spawn bass to get right before they move up on the bed. So water temperatures are 55 to 58 degrees, because what will happen is they can easily move to the spawning flat really fast to get to that, good spawning area. But if that water temperature is 56 degrees, there's still a chance that you may have a cold front over the next couple of weeks that is going to shock the water or shock those fish, make the water colder, and push those fish back off into deeper water. So staying by these steeper banks is great because those fish can push right back out into these deeper drains and ditches, and then they can move right back up on these banks to feed within a matter of a few feet either way. So great places for those bass to set up in the pre-spawn. And so that's kind of the first pattern. And now, again, fish out here deep, try to target those bass that are sitting in 20, maybe 30 to 15 feet of water. 15 to 30 feet is a good depth range for these South Carolina bass offshore this time of year. And then next place I would go is I would actually run way up these rivers. So you can run up any of these rivers. You could run up way up these creeks way up here. You're going to get dirtier water. You could run way up this creek up here until you get back to this part of the lake that has dirtier water, or you could run this East Creek. And this is the one I showed you earlier, so I want to focus on this one. And the reason you want to run further up the creek, if we go back over to Google Earth, is because you have that dirtier water. And in the pre-spawn, what happens is that dirtier water will warm up faster. And so if you get 7 or 8 days in a row of warm water, or warm temperatures, the water on this lower end may be 50 degrees, and the water on this upper end may be 46, 47 degrees in the pre-spawn. And the reason the water temperatures are different is because it takes longer for the water that's clear to cool down. It also takes longer for the clear water to warm up. And it's the complete opposite for this dirty water. The dirty water will cool down really quickly in the wintertime, dropping the temperatures below where the clear water is, but it'll also warm up way faster than your clear water. And so a lot of times when the bass are still in their late winter patterns on the clear end of the lake, they can sometimes get into their pre-spawn patterns or even their spawning patterns way faster on the dirtier water if the weather is consistently warming up and you don't have any major cold fronts that last like a week long. So if you have consistently warming temperatures, the water is really warm. Basically, what you can do is run into this dirty water and try to find any of the shallow rock that you can find. And shallow rock is key this time of year in the pre-spawn on any lake around the country, especially if you're fishing dirty water. And I'll explain why in a second, but first up, thank you for Michael Secrest for the 1999 super chat. It says, thanks, Johnny. Always sharing your channel, best on YouTube. Are you looking for protected areas or for areas the fish back off of? Steeper banks. So kind of a series of both. So protected areas, that's kind of, we'll go back down here to we're talking about with some of this bay. So here's this bay right here. And this area is great because it's protected and it's an area where they can back off of. And the reason I say it's protected is because normally when you have fish in the wintertime, you're going to have a strong north wind after a cold front. And so when you're in the winter, when you're in the pre-spawn, cold fronts are killer because they cause those fish to move off into deeper water. They stop them from moving up shallow to spawn where they're easy to catch. And so this bank right here is protected from any north winds you're going to get. And that will keep those fish a little bit more stable after cold fronts. And then you also want to, again, look for areas that they can pull up shallow. So if you go back over to the Navionics, transition this over here. Again, you want to look for areas where they can, pull off and potentially get in the deeper water out here, but they can also move up shallow to feed. So that's on the tips of some of these steeper points where you have some deep water close to the shallow water on these points. Again, right here, really deep water, 90 feet of water, close to 20 to 30 feet of water. Those fish can move up really quickly to feed up here. Then they can move further off and drop back in the creek channel when the cold fronts come. And again, they're less affected because they're on this north bank, which protects them from the wind. And, this bank right here could also be another really good staging bank because it's a little bit steeper and, they can drop back up in this 49 feet of water when temperatures get cold. And then when it starts to warm up, even after a day of warming up, they can move right back up shallow and feed and put their feed bag on to get ready to spawn. And you can catch them on jerk baits, again, Ned rigs, stuff like that, or then like drop shots and underspins out here on this main lake, deeper stuff. So hopefully that makes sense for you, Michael. So again, thanks for the super chat. So and again, check out my video on Lake Hartwell Bassmaster Classic back in 2018. I guess it was last year. I have the pattern that Casey Ashley used to win in 2015, and then I have the pattern that Jordan Lee used to win. And actually, Brett Ayler finished second in that tournament, fishing this deep water pattern where he was fishing the drop shot out here off some of these points that look very similar to this area right here. That's a good looking area. And then, you kind of repeat that as you go down this lake, look for similar areas where you have a creek winding in. Here's a nice little point. Lots of little points running back in here. Here's a really nice steep bank with a point that winds in. You have that steep bank and a shallow point. Those fish can sit off here when it gets cold, and they can move up here shallow to feed. Oh man, I'm running so behind on time, guys, today. I don't know what's going on. I need to get back on schedule, but let me jump over here and talk really quick about the shallow water bikes. I know some of you guys are like, you stop mid-sentence, go back and talk about the shallow fish. But anyways, so we talked about the water is getting really dirty as you move up here, and you could tell if you look right here, you have nice clear water right in here, and it's because it has that darker tint to it. And as you move further back up into this creek, you have the dirtier water, and that dirtier water is where the water is going to warm up faster, and those fish are going to be generally shallower. So on the lower end out here, where we were talking about, like this area here, those fish are going to be in 15 to 30 feet of water, depending on the wind and the sun and stuff like that. And then up here, where the dirtier water is, these fish may only be getting in maybe 10 feet or less of water. So maybe even sitting up in 4 or 5 feet of water on a warm day, deeper on a colder day. And the reason I mentioned earlier that you should fish around rock, like this riprap bank right here, is perfect. Like this whole little area right here, I would fishing a flat side crankbait and cranking the crap out of these banks right here, and also cranking this little rocky area right in here by this boat ramp. And the reason I say that is because these rocks will hold heat really well. And so what happens is, again, you'll get that snap cold front that comes through and maybe cools the water down for a day or two. Well, these rocks will hold heat from any sunny days the day before, and it will congregate all of those fish after a cold front. And these bass can also spawn up and down these roads and around these roads, this riprap, and they'll actually spawn on this, and so you can catch them fishing again, flat side crankbaits, spinner baits, stuff like that down this riprap, even fishing a jig. And then the other things you want to look for on these dirtier water places are anywhere where you can find any type of hard bottom down these shorelines. And so if we look right here, you can see the shoreline is pretty much just straight mud all throughout. There's not a lot of rock anywhere to be found up this river. But if we keep moving, we keep looking, sooner or later we'll probably run into a small little stretch that has a little bit of rock on it. So let me kind of find a stretch in here. I say that assuming I'll be able to find one without prepping myself beforehand. Here we go. So like right here, you can see there's a little bit of rock down this bank right here, Michael. And so this is the bank you want to fish if you're coming up this river. And it's actually really easy to find this rock. All you have to do, if you haven't seen my Google Earth tutorial, guys, all you have to do is go onto Google Earth, go up to the top of this menu bar, and this is only if you download Google Earth Pro for your desktop computer. It doesn't work on the mobile app, but if you go up here, click this little area here where time's going backwards, you can click this, and you can actually scroll back in time and see when the lake is actually a little bit pulled down. Now, if you actually look right here, there's a guy fishing this spot. So this is definitely a good spot if we have one of the locals fishing it. So definitely come check out this area. It's also a great way to find fish. Just go into Google Earth and look for all the boats. I'm just kidding. Don't do that. That's not a good idea. Not many people know what they're doing, surprisingly enough, when they're fishing. That's not a good strategy. I had a friend who tried to do that one time. It did not work out well for him. I thought it was really funny, though, that he tried that. But anyways, this little rocky bank right here, you can see there's a few little rocks down this bank, and there's no rocks down really the rest of this whole area. And so those rocks, again, are going to hold heat. They're also right in the mouth of a nice little spawning pocket. It's a great little transition bank these fish can get on. And so when you are going up these rivers, especially if you fish a really silted river system, I would definitely go and crankbait, fish, spinnerbait, and stuff down these rockier banks. Any kind of rock you can find, even if it's a few like 7 or 8 rocks, that will draw those fish in and just suck them into that area. And another thing, again, that riprap is great for that. Our super chat from Zach White. He says, fishing right before rain, changing these tactics this time of year. So does fishing before rain affect that? And actually, Zach, what I would do is check out my most recent video on cold front bass fishing. Not many people checked out that video, so you guys could definitely go look at that one. It explains how bass relate to, or react to cold fronts, and I explain it perfectly, or I wouldn't say perfectly, but the best of my ability on how they act in the pre-spawn, spawn, and summertime, and the rest of the year as well. But in general, whenever you have rain, you normally have a cold front following it up. There's hardly ever days when you have rain and then it's super warm the next day in the wintertime or in the pre-spawn. And so what happens is that rain, right before it rains, the fronts can moving through and you'll have a change in pressure, so barometric pressure, and you'll normally have some stronger winds, and that's going to get those fish super active. And so you can catch them up shallow on these rocks. If you're running back down the lake, can we go back over to Navionics? Over here, you can see that rain and the wind will push these fish back up on top of these points. So if they were sitting out here in the middle of the day when it's sunny, there's no wind, there's no good conditions to get those fish to feed. Right before it starts to rain or right before that wind or that front comes through, the wind will pick up and they'll push up on top of these shallow points. They'll push up against some of these steeper banks or even pull up in these little ditches on these points. And they're going to get super active. And then once it starts raining, a lot of times I find that the fish like to get close to the bottom during the rain. Then after the rain, you'll have the cold front conditions, and then you'll have to check out that video for the rest. But hopefully that answers your question there just a little bit. So that's kind of what I would focus on right before it rains. And then, let's see here. Last thing I want to talk about, I know I'm running way behind on my time. I will make sure I give Sardis Lake a good 15, 20 minutes, and I will get to all your questions. So it's be a little bit longer stream than normal. I know that really just is painful to you guys. And I will make sure that I get back to everyone's as many comments as I can in the post or after all the lakes are done. But last thing I want to talk about was actually pulling up into the backs of these pockets when the fish are in the pre-spawn. Because what will happen is on these blueback herring lakes, for whatever reason, it's almost like inexplicable to me, but a lot of times these bass or these blueback herring in the pre-spawn, when water temperatures are 50 to 58 degrees, the blueback herring first thing in the morning will push all the way back in the back of some of these shallow pockets on the main lake. And so you'll have like a main lake pocket like this pocket right here. For whatever reason, I don't know why, but these blueback herring will push way back into the backs of these creeks, and they'll be all the way here in the middle of these creeks in the very back. And they'll basically just be moved up shallow. I don't know if it's because there's some plankton up there they're feeding on or why they're up there, but they push up here at night, and they're just crushing it, right here in the center of these little ditches and pockets, stuff like that. And so what these guys will do is in the first 45 minutes of the morning, basically taking advantage of that morning bite or that evening bite, almost that night bite, they'll take advantage of it, and they'll pull back into these pockets, and they'll fish underspins, and they'll fish suspending jerkbaits, deep suspending jerkbaits in the center of these pockets. And what you basically have to do is just drive back into a pocket, idle for a second. If you see fish and bait everywhere on your graph, you just basically drop your trolling motor and start fan casting down the center of these pockets with that underspin with the jerkbait, and you can wear them out, catch like 18 to 20 pounds first thing in the morning. And a lot of times it's weird because you'll pull up into this pocket, there won't be any fish, so you'll pull in, you'll graph for a second, nothing. You'll run back into this pocket, you'll graph back in here, nothing. Then you run over to this pocket, and it's just loaded up. So you have to run multiple spots in the morning to try to get this bite going, and you may only catch it 1 out of every 5 trips, but if you catch it right, you'll catch some giant fish that way. So we got Ricky Payne. He's saying, got the $20 super chat. Thank you, Ricky. He says Chickamauga Lake. So, guys, I don't want to set a terrible precedent for having you guys donate, and then I do your lakes on the super chat there. So, if you could join my Patreon page, it's same. You can give the donations, you can do the super chats just like that, and you can sign up to do the Patreon. And so, Ricky, I will put you in for the drawing for the Patreon page for this next time, but that's the last one I'm going to do. If you guys do want to have your lake submitted to do a lake breakdown the stream, go join the Patreon page. It's over here. It's really super easy to join. I got like over 80 guys over there right now who are helping the channel out, all awesome for supporting the channel, and I want to do it all through there, just keep it fair for everyone, and that way no one has like a preferential treatment just because they got to throw more money during the super chats and stuff like that. But I will put your stuff in there. I really appreciate the super chat, Ricky. I really do, and I will put your lake in for the upcoming streams going forward. So other than that, with all that out of the way, I want to jump over to our last lake. I know whoever, I think, let me see actually who submitted this lake. So we had Richard Hutchinson. He submitted Sardis Lake in Oklahoma. And so I know he's probably been chomping at the bit this whole stream for me to take a look at his lake. So I apologize for the little delay here. I got a little bit overexcited talking about all these lakes today. Working all day in the office building, and I get to come home and talk about fishing. So sometimes you get a little bit overexcited to talk to you guys. I haven't even really been getting into any of the comments. So hope you guys are enjoying what I'm saying. Hope I'm not blabbing around too much. But this is Sardis Lake in Oklahoma. and it's a really small lake. And as you can see just from the colors on it's kind of hard to see the colors on this lake because it's like got some weird picture distortions. But basically, if you look at it, this lake is chocolate milk year round. It's just super dirty. It probably has like a foot to 6 inches of visibility on the main lake, and it's just shallow and muddy. And it's a really good lake. I heard you catch some really good. I hear it's a really good lake. Catch some good fish. It has some really good shallow water cover, so you have some shallow grass. If you look up in here, it also has a ton of standing timber, and so I'm sure that you have a lot of lakes like this around, or at least someone has lakes like this where you have trees everywhere, you have some shallow grass, and the lake is super muddy. And these lakes can be really intimidating to fish because if you look down like this bank, for example, there's literally trees everywhere. And you're like, okay, where do I fish? There's good trees all over the bank. We have shallow grass everywhere. There's great bass habitat all over the place. There's also really no areas of clear water and dirty water. So we just looked at Hartwell, where you can, or not Hartwell, Richard B. Russell, where you have the clear water on the lower end and the dirty water on the upper end. So if you can't figure them out in the dirty water, you can run south to the dam and fish the clear water and switch it up. But on this lake, it's small, the water's dirty all the way around the lake, even down by the dam, it's super dirty. And you can even go back in time and kind of see that the water clarity never really improves on any of these images, even when it gets sometimes a little bit blurry. But basically, the water clarity is always pretty terrible. And so, with that being said, what I want to do is show you how I kind of break down these lakes where they all look the same. The water clarity is always dirty, and you have to try to decipher where the fish are without using a lot of the clues you would have on your bigger lakes. So let me switch over to Navionics. That's the easiest way to pick out the best spots on these type of lakes. So here's Sardis. And so if we kind of take a look here, you can see in the center you have you have some areas where it gets about 40 foot deep. So it can be potentially, it could be a clear lake if, it's deep enough for it to look like it could be a clear lake. So maybe the images they have on here are just when it's super dirty. So I may be a little bit misleading you guys. And hopefully it's actually dirty year round. If it's not, then I apologize for that in advance. But basically on these lakes where you have a ton of standing timber, you also have the flooded timber and you have the vegetation. I pretty much ignore all of that to an extent because you have so much cover these bass can get on that just because a spot has grass on it or just because it has standing timber on it doesn't mean it's going to be a good spot to catch fish. And so given that the water is really dirty on this lake, and let's assume that even on the best days when it's not rained for a long time and the water starts to clear up, you may get 2 to 3 foot of visibility at the max. And then the rest of the time it's really just chocolate milk, especially right now with all the rain. I'm sure it's just super dirty. What you're looking for in the pre-spawn are places where these bass can spawn. Again, they are close to deep water, and you want to follow where these creek channels are. But deep water is really relative because on this lake, deep water may only be 5-6 feet of water, where on Richard B. Russell, deep water was 96 feet of water. And so very different types of ways you approach this. But some of the areas I really like just looking in this are these 2 bays. You have this bay right here and you have this bay right here. These are 2 areas that popped to me right away when I looked at this lake. And reason for that is because you have some really good spawning areas back in these creeks. And so you can see you have a lot of different places these fish can spawn. There's actually a really nice island around here these bass can spawn around and get protected from the wind. And then you also have a really nice creek channel that feeds this pocket. So you have the deeper water, you have the shallow water where they'll spawn. And so the places that I'm going to be looking for on these shallow, dirty lakes is I want to be trying to fish within a cast of the bank probably 80% of the time when I'm fishing in really dirty water lakes. And so what I mean by that is I want to be, maybe keeping my boat within 20 to 30 yards, 20 yards of the bank, 20 to 30 yards of the bank at any given time. And so that means that I may fish off the bank just a little bit. And so, I may put my boat out here in 10 feet of water and cast parallel to the bank and bring a flat side crankbait and bang it through some of those stumps and stuff like that out here in front of this bank. Like right here, we have an old pond that comes in, and there's actually a steeper bank that swings in here, and then it kind of bumps out here and it kind of swings back in. So you have almost a little point that sticks out here, and you can see the point right there. And you have an old pond, and a creek channel swings right out in front of it. And this spot's right in the mouth of a spawning pocket. This is just an ideal spot to find bass. And if we look at the contour lines and we switch back over to Google Earth here, we can see, whoops, whoa, calm down. Let me get a better image. Here we go. Here's that spot right here. You can see right out in front of this point, we have some standing trees. There's not many of them, but there's some standing trees out in front, and there's a bunch of grass on the bank. And so what I would try to do if I was fishing out here is I would put my boat out in maybe 10 to 12 feet of water, and I would cast parallel to this bank, or even like a 45-degree angle with a flat-sided crankbait, trying to cast my bait down into about 3 foot of water, and then crank it down into that 7, 8, 9 foot of water range. And my favorite lipless crankbait or flat-sided crankbait for this type of lake, especially in the pre-spawn, if I switch over to this really quick, is a let's see here. It is a actually, I need to find this. I don't know what it's called because the one I use is a old Strike King crankbait that was discontinued, but crankbait I'm trying to show you is I want to show you one that's actually on the market. Just give me 1 second here. I always pull this up and I always forget what it's called. It's made from one of the old pros, and I shouldn't forget what it is. It's the PH Custom. This is the one it is right here. PH Custom. And I fish it in this exact pattern right here. And if we look at the top of this bait, it is a flat-sided crankbait, super flat. But I fish it in this Sarcher's black back color. So it has a lot of pop in that dirty water. So even if you're fishing in 6 inches of visibility or a foot of visibility, it will completely pop in the water. But that flat-sided crankbait's great when the water temperatures, even when it's 46, 47 degrees, these fish will bite it. And they'll bite it all the way up to when the water temperature gets up to, 40 or up to like 58, 59 degree water. So a great little deal right there. And so if we transition back over to Google Earth here, again, basically we want to be casting that bait out in front of this little point. There's another point over here that had the same exact deal. There's a little notch in the point. If we go back over to Google Earth, I'll show you in a second, or into Navionics, but I would cast my crankbait across this point as well and try to focus on areas that are in the mouths of some of these big spawning bays but have deep water close by. So if we go back over to Navionics, you can see this little point right here, again, has a little bit of a pond here, but there's a little bit deeper water that swings in, and you can catch some fish on that flooded timber. The creek channel swings right up against this bank as well, and this is a great spot to go catch fish on this lake. Another point that looks really good is just this little point right here. Again, it has a creek channel that swings in pretty close to it. It's in the mouth of 2 spawning pockets. Deadly right there. And then another spot I really liked is in this pocket right here. You have a creek channel that winds in, and it cuts in right into the back of this pocket. And we have 2 nice little shorelines. We have one shoreline right here and another shoreline that's connected to this island. Both of these look like great places. They're a little bit steeper. You can catch them on a spinnerbait or that flat-side crankbait. Catch some really good fish doing that. And you can also catch fish in these same areas, fishing a jig like through those trees. But for me, on these dirty water lakes, I like to try to cover as much water as I can because a lot of times the fish on these dirty water lakes, they basically will only react if you put a bait in front of their face. But they don't really it doesn't seem to matter in my experience if you put a jig in front of their face or you put a crankbait in front of their face. It won't make a difference. And so what happens is that you'll bump that crankbait off one of those logs or stumps and those fish will just react to it. Same as if you pitch a jig right on their head. And so I like to fish a crankbait because I can cover a lot more water, and I can fish that flat-side crankbait even after cold front conditions and just kind of reel it a little bit slower and still cover 2 or 3 times the amount of water I would if I was flipping like a rattleback jig or something like that. So those are some of the good pre-spawn areas I check out there. And then if we transition back over to Google Earth, kind of move over here, we can see that the other places I would check out, and also I would kind of just duplicate those same areas when I'm, looking for other areas. I would duplicate these type of spots around the lake. So maybe there's some good areas all around in here. I haven't taken a look at all of them, but there's a lot of different pockets, and just fish the fronts of those pockets. But then the other thing I really liked is if you move up the lake up here, there's actually a really, really, really nice riprap bank leading back into this creek. This is going to be money. Like pretty much guaranteed that there's going to be fish down this bank right here. Again, fishing that flat side crankbait or a spinnerbait and just fishing it down this bank right here, and you're going to crush them. It's almost guaranteed. Reason is because it's a bank that, here's the main lake right here, and this bank is leading into a major spawning bay. And that rock, again, like we talked about in Lake Hartwell, is going to hold a lot of heat, and it's going to get those fish moving up shallow and keep them up shallow, even in that dirty water. Even when the water temperatures are 44, 45 degrees, they'll sit on this rocky riprap bank. And again, just fish that flat side crankbait or spinnerbait down this riprap, and you're going to absolutely crush them. And that pretty much goes for any lake around the country this time of year. If you have riprap and dirty water, you should be fishing with a crankbait every single time you drive by it. Because even if you see 10 people fishing it, that stuff reloads so fast, and you can just catch them so well this time of year on that. Austin Simpson, he says, $24.99 super chat. Best fishing info I've found. From now on, when I'm on the lake, I'm asking, what would Johnny do? That's awesome. Thanks, man. Thank you for the super chat. Really appreciate it. And I don't know. I guess I'm very honored that you're thinking that on the water. I don't know the best way to describe that, but it's so cool. Something that I'm really happy that you guys enjoy the content, enjoy what I'm making, because it is something that I really enjoy doing, and really just trying to share everything I know. I don't feel like I'm the expert on everything. I don't know every fishing technique that's ever worked. I don't have all of the fishing experience in the world like Kevin Van Dam, something like that, but I have had a lot of experiences, and so I'm trying to share what I can, and as I continue to fish, I want to share what I've learned, so I'm glad you guys appreciate me sharing what I'm doing, even if, I'm not always, 100% right on everything. You guys are really good about, taking what I'm talking about, not always assuming that I'm talking about exactly this one specific thing. You kind of generalize it and apply it to your lakes, apply it to what you're doing. And it takes, a really good fisherman, someone who knows what they're doing, to be able to do that. And so you guys are awesome for being able to do that. And you're awesome for just supporting the channel and everything. So thank you so much. I don't really know what I'm doing. I'm just blabbing right now. So I've been talking for an hour and 6 minutes straight and worked for 12 hours a day. So it's been a long day. But other than that, that was Sardis Lake. Wanted to kind of give a brief overview of the areas I would look for, so hopefully that gives you an idea of what this lake has to offer and how you should handle those shallow, dirty water lakes. And so now what I'm going to do, guys, I'm going to run through all your comments. So I have 193 people on, and so awesome. Ricky says the Johnny Schultz theory. I dig it. That's awesome. Johnny Schultz theory. I've got so many questions. Okay, so Bassin with class got a lot of question marks. He also has a quotation mark in there, got a lot of stuff. So he said, what are some tips for my first tournament? Definitely going to answer that. And then I will be answering everyone's questions here in a second. So if you do have to jump off, I know a lot of people have family stuff to get to. This video will be posted directly to my channel right after the stream. And so definitely come back and watch the video afterwards. If you have a question, I'll try to get through all the questions really quick that you've put, like fish the moment, all the question marks, so you can come back and watch that. So don't want to hold you guys here all night, hold you hostage. But thank you for all the great comments too. Like Keith saying, I bass fish for over 40 years, and Johnny has taught me a lot. It's awesome. Thank you, Keith. So Bassin with class tournament. So two things I would recommend if you're going tournament fishing. I'm assuming, actually, Bassin with class. Let me know what your what lake you're going to be fishing, or at least the state or something, so I can kind of give you an idea of like what the temperatures are, area of the country, something like that. I probably won't go to your exact lake, but I can give you some generalities. And so, in general, though, what I do when I pre-fish for a tournament, you're fishing your first tournament. If you have a day to pre-fish, like I'm fishing my first tournament in 3 years on March 9th on Beaver Lake, and I'm gonna get like maybe a day. I'm gonna have the day right before to practice because it's a Sunday tournament. I'll fish on Saturday. I may have a day to go out this weekend, but I'm not sure because it's supposed to snow on Sunday and Saturday is supposed to be 35 degrees for a high. So I don't even know if it's gonna be we're able to get on the lake because the boat ramps may be icing over a little bit. But let's say I was going out, let's say on Lake Washita. And so Lake Washita is a lake I fish all the time. Actually, I know Lake Washita too well. Let's go to just Greason. We'll go to Lake Greason. I fished Lake Greason one time. I finished third there as a co-angler in a Bassmaster Weekend Series tournament. So I only fished out here once, but I at least kind of know the lake. So if I was going out fishing on Lake Greason, did Bassman Class get a response in for what his lake was? I don't think he did. But anyways, what I would do is if I have a day to practice. Oh, by the way, thank you so much, Zach Harvey said thank you for the video. Have you ever tried the Guggen baits? If so, what do you think about them? What brand, color, jig do you use the most for deep or shallow? So Zach, let me get to that question here in a second. Let me finish up my thought here on this on the practice stuff, and then I will get back to that and we can go over to Tackle Warehouse. So I'll get to that in like a couple minutes if you can hold on for just a second. But thank you so much for the super chat. So what I would do if I was practicing, like I'm going to be practicing this upcoming weekend and hopefully or on Saturday, is if you have a boat, I would spend the majority of your practice day driving around. And so I wouldn't bother at all actually fishing for the majority of your first practice day. And you're going to think that's crazy. And it was very crazy when I started doing it because a lot of people are always thinking, oh, you have to fish, you have to find all these fish in practice. Well, what I found is that, one, I rarely ever catch fish in the tournament that I caught in my practice day. It rarely ever happens. And the reason because the conditions will sometimes change. Fishing pressure will pressure the fish. Someone will get to the fish I'm trying to get to before me. And really the only time I've ever caught them well on a spot where I've practiced before is when I get like 3 or 4 days in a row to practice. But if I only have one practice day, I hardly ever catch them on the spots where I catch them. I catch them just adjusting, especially if I do well in a tournament. I would say like half the tournaments I've won in my life have been on fishing spots I've never fished before. So I just pull up their tournament day and just start catching them, or I figure out a pattern or something. So what I like to do is instead of fishing a lot, I just drive around the whole lake and I pay attention to water temperature, water clarity. I see what the different areas of the lake have to offer. And so I'll spend, maybe 6 hours just driving around the lake, running up to the top end of the lake. What's going on up here? What's going on in the backs of these creeks? Ooh, this bank looks really good. Water temperature is 50 degrees and slightly clear. And, I think I catch them on this bank. And I run down the lake over here into this creek, and I'm like, oh, this creek sucks. I don't see any bait. Water temperature is really cold, and I'm not feeling it. I'm not seeing any fish on the graph, any life. And then I run down to this creek over here, and I see, oh, there is bait everywhere on this creek. And I'm just looking at my graph, seeing that I'm seeing a lot of activity. Maybe I'm seeing birds diving on points. That's a great indication there's fish in the area. And so I just make mental notes of all of that. Sometimes like a notebook and note it down. Like I hit a waypoint, I say this waypoint is this, or this creek over here is this. Sometimes I'll like print out a map and circle it, stuff like that. And so that's kind of what I'll do. And then when it comes tournament day, one thing I've always found when I was practicing for bass fishing tournaments or fishing tournaments is that halfway through the day, I'll run out of areas to fish because I fished all the spots I could look in practice. And normally you'll fish for 8 hours in practice. You'll eliminate 2/3 of the water you fish. You'll have maybe 3 or 4 spots you want to go to. And then you fish those spots 2 or 3 times, and that takes you about 4 hours. And then you have 4 hours, and you're like, I don't know what to do. I am stuck. I haven't caught any fish in the spots where I practice, or I caught a few, but I haven't caught enough. And that happens to me all the time. And also, you'll sore lip your fish by catching them in practice, stuff like that. And so when I did this technique, though, I found, wow, I have more fish or more spots that I want to fish then I can even cover in a day. And so I basically just say, okay, what are the top 10 or 15 best spots I saw? And I'll start on the lower end. Let's say if it's the morning and the pre-spawn, I'll start in the lower end because that water's going to be a little bit warmer from the overnight period. Unless I've really, like, if you had like 6 or 7 warm days in a row, and I think that water's going to stay warm, you have a warm night, I may run up to the dirtier water because you can get those fish to be active a little bit better too. But either way, I'll start wherever I think my best area is, and then I'll just start hopping around all of the best little creeks and stuff like that. And for me, it's really motivating because I'm like, oh, I can jump to this creek here. I fish 5 or 6 spots. I'm like, oh, well, that sucked. I didn't catch any fish. But I remember, oh, this creek over here had this awesome brush pile out in the center of it, and there was another rocky bank over here. So I'm always hopeful that even though I didn't catch fish in my first area, I always have greener pastures to go to, and it keeps me motivated. My energy level never gets down because I know, I never practice here, so if I don't catch anything, that's fine. It just means the fish weren't there, but 9 times out of 10 or 10 times out of 10, I catch fish. I haven't zeroed in a bass fishing tournament since the first tournament I ever fished out of my boat, which was when I was 16. And then I fished like 50 more tournaments since then and never zeroed. And it's all because I just do this sort of strategy where I just fish a ton of areas, 15, 20 areas in a day, stuff that I think looks good. And every once in a while, you'll pull up on a spot and you'll fish 10 spots in a row, nothing. And then the 11th spot, I'll pull up and I'll just start wearing them out. Or I'll catch a fish off this point and I'll realize, oh, this point is good. Let's run to this point that looks the same. Oh, I caught a fish here. Then I run to this point over here, catch a fish. Oh, that's good. And I get a pattern going and I start developing something. And, it may take 3 or 4 hours into the day to catch him. But if you can get over that, like, fear of zeroing and not catching them and know any time of the day those fish could start biting, you can start crushing them. And I would say that most of my tournament victories came in my college fishing careers, which is crazy. When I was fishing in college, most of my tournaments I probably won like 7 or 8 like club tournaments, and then I won a regional championship. All the fish I caught were after 11 o'clock in every tournament I won. My fishing partner and I thought we were like always stressed out because we never caught a fish before 11 o'clock in a single tournament that we won. It's wild. But it was because we would do this strategy. We would run around the lake. We would suck for the first 2, 3, 4 hours a day. Then we'd finally get a bite. And I don't know why we wouldn't get bites in the morning. It just happened that way. That was just like our little curse. But then we would finally catch him, a fish at 11, and then we were able to follow that around the lake, continue the pattern, and then catch fish. So that's my 2 cents on that. I don't know if that's exactly what you're looking for, but that's how I would approach a tournament if I was going into it. So going back to Zach's question, Zach Harvey, with the $50 super chat. Thank you so much, Zach. Have I tried the Guggen baits? I have not. They look very similar to a lot of soft plastic baits. That's because every soft plastic bait on the market to me looks pretty much the same, to be honest. I'm not very picky with my baits. I fish 2 colors of soft plastics, green pumpkin and black and blue, basically. That's like 90% of what I throw. I'll throw like a couple different random colors just because I got confidence in them for no reason, but those 2 colors will get you most of the way. And I don't care if I'm fishing a Strike King rodent, a sweet beaver, a Guggen baits beaver, whatever the different beaver is, it's all just gonna be a beaver bait. As long as you're putting your bait in front of active fish, that's what I think matters. But if we're talking about brand color jig that you fish deep or shallow, if we go over to Tackle Warehouse, I'll show you what I throw. Used to be sponsored by Strike King for years, so I use a lot of Strike King baits in my videos. But now I just talk about any baits really, but I'll just stick with Strike King because that's what I have the most confidence in just because I've thrown them for years. And I fish other brands of baits and stuff now and stuff, but that's just kind of what I've been accustomed to, so that's what I'll show you here. So again, any of these football jigs are going to be good, but if I'm fishing deep water, my go-to jig is let's go down here, sorry, I'm going to try to take a second to find this, is whoops, where'd it go? Here we go. The Strike King Tour Grade football jig. So I'll fish this in half ounce if I'm fishing in 12 feet of water or less. I'll fish the half ounce size, and then I'll fish the 3/4 ounce size if I'm fishing in deeper than 12 feet of water. That's all. Really straightforward. And I throw the football jig in 1 color. That's green pumpkin craw. That's the only color I throw my football jig in end of point stop, and I fish that in clear water. I'll fish it in pretty dirty water. Even if I have like a foot or 2 foot of visibility, I'll throw the green pumpkin, no problems. And then if I'm fishing in shallow water, my number one go-to jig in shallow water is I fish the same jig if I'm flipping, if I'm skipping a jig, it doesn't really matter. And it is, let me find it here. It's a Strike King Hack Attack heavy cover swim jig. And I need to find it here. Give me 1 second, guys. Not here. Okay. This is where it always goes off the rails on my live streams because I start having improv. Oh, man. I get a lot of stuff prepared ahead of time, guys. Here we go. We get the Strike King Hack Attack heavy cover swim jig. When I'm fishing in shallow water, this is my go-to jig. I'll fish it in the bluegill pattern because a lot of times shallow bass love to feed on bluegill when they're up shallow, especially if I get clear water. And then I'll fish black and blue in the dirtier water, and I'll pair this with a Strike King Rage Craw. Black and blue for this, green pumpkin for this, and I'll pair the football jig with either a Strike King Green Pumpkin Rage Craw if the water temperatures are above 75 degrees, because it has a lot of extra action, and they like that when the water temperature is warm. Then when the water temperature is cold, I'll fish a Strike King Menace Grub, which is just a little more subtle, and if the water temperature is less than 75 degrees, I'll fish the Menace Grub, again in green pumpkin color. So that's pretty much it. That's my jig setup. So let's go back over the comments. Got a bunch of, oh man, I got so many comments to go after, guys. We might be here for a while. You guys have been awesome tonight, though. So many people on, so many people commenting. It's going crazy tonight, guys. I don't know what happened. It was kind of quiet there, and then Bruce started dropping super chats, and then super chats started flying like crazy, and then someone was leaving the comments. People were flying. We're getting a lot of questions flying. So we got one from Vaden Ellis. He said, me and Bassman class are fishing a tournament on Bay Springs Lake. What pattern should we attack? So Vaden, I know I answered kind of this tournament strategy. Hopefully that kind of made sense to you. As far as, I don't really know what Bay Springs Lake looks like, but check out my video on pre-spawn migration. It's a video that's on my channel. It's like a complete guide to pre-spawn migration. That video will definitely help you out if you're looking for what patterns and how the fish are going to be moving. It's hard to kind of give a for sure answer on a pattern, but check out that video. It'll definitely help. And then we got Keith the Trucker. He says, what's your early spring clear water bait? Still a jig? So basically, Keith, if I'm fishing clear water, my 3 baits I fish in the spring are either number one is a jerk bait, and I'll fish a suspending jerk bait in clear water pretty much anytime there's any type of wind. So if there's any wind at all, I'm going to be fishing the jerk bait. The other bait that I'm fishing, if there's going to be wind and cloud cover, is a flat side crankbait, KVD 1.5 flat. I love a KVD 1.5 flat. And then a jig if there's no wind. So if it's no wind and just dead calm and maybe sunny as well, I'll fish the jig. If there's some wind, I normally fish the jerk bait. And if there's wind and clouds, I'll also fish the jerk bait, but also pick up the crankbait. You can also catch them on a crankbait when it's sunny and windy as well. And you can catch them on a crankbait without wind and a jerkbait without wind, but just those are some generalities. Hopefully that helps. Let's see here. Ernest McKinter, he says, do you fish bulky, dark color and bright color in muddy water? So if the water's super muddy, I love fishing a black neon tube with a rattle in it. So a black neon 4.5-inch flipping tube with a rattle inserted into the tube. That's my number one muddy water bait because it gives off a lot of vibration or a lot of good sound with the rattle. Plus, the black neon tube is just really visible. And the reason I go for a tube over another bait, and I'll show you what I'm talking about, is because you can actually insert that rattle into a tube. So I fish like a Strike King Pro Model flipping tube, but whatever tube you want to use. Here's a Big Bite Baits one. Basically, I use a 4-inch tube, black neon color. I don't even have black neon in this tube. I guess don't buy this one. The black neon. Black neon is the number one color. But I put a rattle inserted up in the tube, and then just Texas rig it. And then the other bait I like to throw is a a spinner bait, 1/2 ounce or 3/4 ounce spinner bait with a single Colorado blade. And I like a really big Colorado blade that puts off a lot of vibration. And then let's see here. Keep going. Looking for the fish the moments, looking for the question marks. Let's see here. I'm going to try to read back through all your comments. So you guys, you have so many great comments. So I want to make sure I read through all of them. And I also have some friends and parents and stuff watching the stream, so they always let me know if I get some good comments. So I'm hearing all your comments. Don't worry about that. If I'm not reading them out loud, I'm definitely going to be reading them afterwards, just kind of scrolling through them while I'm at work and stuff like that. So no worries about that. But anyways, Desert Angler says, thank you for the stream, Johnny. You do a great job. I always learn something from your videos. You're the only YouTuber I watch these days. Keep up the great work. Thank you, Desert Angler. Appreciate that. Get a lot of people agreeing. Ricky Payne said, sorry, Johnny, I tried to join Patreon, but it said the $20 was sold out. Ricky, if you're still on, I'm actually going to be transitioning away from my Patreon like tiers. There's like the breakdowns, the personal lessons. I'm going to be setting up a website pretty soon, and I'll be setting up one-on-one fishing lessons on there just because of the demand and everything and the way that Patreon's set up. It's so hard to schedule appointments. So I'm setting up a website where you can actually go and schedule appointments and schedule fishing lessons and stuff. And I should be doing fishing lessons like 6 slots a week. So if you guys want me to break down your lakes and stuff like that, you guys can go in and schedule those lessons with me. And so they'll be like on Google Chat, GChat, and you can actually, I'll pull up Navionics, Google Earth, and you'll send me stuff that you want me to talk about beforehand. I'll prep, and we could talk about, your lakes, tournament strategy, prep, lures, boat storage stuff. We talk about all kinds of stuff. Some guys have actually used me, like they'll schedule me right before the tournaments. We look at the tournament, we break down the lake, we get their practice strategy together, they go practice, and then they go fish the tournament, and they come back and say, here's what we did in the tournament, here's what went wrong. We can kind of talk back and forth on how that works. So it's been pretty fun to do that through my Patreon. Then Michael Secrest says, if you're fishing shallow and notice you're catching a lot of males, how do you transition to target females? So if you're catching a lot of males, normally what happens is that the males move up shallow first. And so if you're catching a lot of male bass and you're finding that you're catching a ton of males and you're fishing down the bank and catching them, try to start casting and moving the boat away from the bank, because those male bass will move up first and the females will be about a week behind them. And so a lot of times you can catch them still shallow, but in like the shallower staging areas. So in the center of any ditches, or maybe off secondary points, like off the point 10 or 15 feet, not right up against the bank. And so that's kind of one way you can do it. And then also if you're on the bottom end, like I know you were fishing, was it Mitchell or Richard Russell Lake? If you're catching a lot of buck bass or male bass on the lower end of the lake, and you're in the clear water, but you're not catching all the females, run to the dirtier water, because normally those female bass in the dirtier water are going to be a week ahead of the bass in the clearer water. And so normally if you want to just fish shallow, that's your strength, go to the dirtier water if you're catching a lot of male bass in the clear water. And also if you're catching a lot of male bass in the dirty water, but not a lot of females, you can actually go back down to the clear water, and normally those bass, again, will be a week behind the dirty water bass in the clear water. And you can find those clear water bass in a more pre-spawn mode and catch them a little bit easier than the bass that are maybe just getting up on the beds and getting ready to spawn. Sometimes the bass are a little bit finicky. Hope that all made sense. That was kind of a lot. I need to make a video on that. That's a really good idea, actually, to make a video on. Anyways, see here. Kane says he's being humble, lol. Let's see here. What would Flash the Moment do? That's JT. JT's keeping Flash the Moment going, for sure. And then Hog Farmer said that Sardis Lake is in Bigfoot territory. I don't know what that means, but that's awesome. Clint Hart says, you have helped me catch more fish. Thanks. Awesome, man. Do you ever, let's see here. Randall Chapman says, great contact, Johnny. Keep up the good work. Fish on. Awesome. Thanks, man. And so Ricky Payne says, is there any at Fish the Moment gear folks can order? Shirts, hats? Ricky, I'm working on some hats. I don't have one near me. But I have a fish of the moment hat that I potentially could make for you guys if you guys would like that. I'm also thinking about doing like fish of the moment sun gloves. I love sun gloves. They're really helpful, and I want to try to get some nicer sun gloves and put like the fish of the moment logo on the hand. So maybe it's not like super gaudy like the fish of the moment logo, but you can always look down and remember fish of the moment just by looking at your sun gloves. So let me know if you guys want those in the chat and also in the comments of this video. And if enough of you guys want it, I can order them and I can just put them up on the website that I'll be making for sale. So let me know. So let's see here. Austin Simpson says Bay Springs, Mississippi. Fishing moment. Missed that, Austin, on the lake. So it's Bay Springs. Got that. Let's see here. And they're saying, lol, we tried. Sorry, man. I get right into it and I just go straight into it. Locating fish with no practice. Spots and Naviax. I'm already about an hour and a half in the stream, man. I apologize. I won't be able to jump through the lake, but definitely check out that pre-spawn video. I do a breakdown of like Lake Chico on that pre-spawn video. Go check that out. That is a dirty water lake with cypress trees, very similar to your Mississippi lake. So I would go check that out for sure. And then moment, I have a small boat with bow-mounted trolling motor and fish trolling motor only lakes. Is a small side imaging unit worth it, or would it still work on a trolling motor? Side imaging won't work super well if your boat's going less than about 3 miles an hour. So unless you want to crank that trolling motor up to like max and then like a trolling motor on the lake high speed, side imaging may not work super well. Down imaging doesn't work super well either if you're not going fast enough. It's not terrible, but it's not great either. So I wouldn't really invest in side imaging if I were you, unless you have an engine that can get you going 3 or 4 or 5 miles an hour, especially since you'll just be tearing up that trolling motor battery if you are putting on full blast the whole day. So I would probably pass on it. You can still find a lot of really good fish just with the down imaging and with the 2D sonar, and it's a little bit better picture. So I just wouldn't say, I say not waste the money there. Let's see here. Keith Trigger says, Johnny, I eliminated half my tackle using that theory and it works. Awesome, man. Let's see here. Lots of different jigs. Yes, sun gloves. Yes, sun gloves, sun mask. What is your website? I don't have the website up yet. I actually had a great guy. Let me pull up his website really quick. I want to actually give him a shout out on the stream right now, if I can, if that's okay with you guys. I had a guy who gave me fishthemoment.com for free. He just gave me the domain name, which is incredible. So let me switch over here. This is his webpage, Dr. Krankenstein, Chris Wohl. He literally had fishthemoment.com and it was about to expire, and so it's gonna be fishthemoment.com, have the website and everything already, but I'm gonna be making that up. And he just gave me the website for free. Amazing guy. Didn't have to do that at all. And so I'm waiting for all the stuff to transfer over still. There's some he transferred it to me from his account. So I'm waiting for that transfer. Like they lock it for a while because of the transfer stuff like that. And then they'll transfer it back. So then I can start working on the website. But basically, Dr. Krankenstein's website. And he has Instagram, stuff like that. I'll be linking his stuff later on when I actually make the website live. And I'll just put a shout out to him because, again, he just gave me the website. Didn't have to do that. Didn't have to make it so easy for me. So super, super, super grateful to Chris and to all you guys always helping me out, giving me comments, give me suggestions in the comments. So many of you guys are, giving me advice on what I should do with like breakdowns, pricing, lake breakdowns, like how I should do guide fishing trips, like all kinds of awesome stuff. And you guys are I know a lot of you guys are, owning your own business, you run businesses, stuff like that. And so again, always appreciate you guys helping out a young guy getting his start in this sort of stuff. So again, just want to thank you guys for that. And just thanking, thanking Chris here. So let me switch up to this real quick. I'm just going to transition over here, get that off. So, anyways, people seem like gloves. People would love that. So, yes, I will definitely try to do the sun gloves. Um, and then let's see here. A lot of people saying sun gloves. That is awesome. I will definitely get on that then. I want my own pair of sun gloves too. So be awesome. And then a bunch of guys are still asking stuff. Beaver this weekend, post front, muddy water. Where should I start? Uh, I don't even know. That's where I'm trying to figure out when I finish that tournament. But I'm starting probably mid lake down towards the dam, maybe even. If I can, just because it's gonna be so cold this weekend. I would try to stay in the clear water, just because it's been muddy, and just get the clearest water you can find, and then just fish slow down some of the steeper banks, 45-degree banks, maybe out in front of some of the standing timber. Like stay a cast and a half off the bank and try to fish the standing timber, like keeping your bait in over 20 to 30 feet of water with a jerk bait, stuff like that. That's normally how I can catch them this time of year. But it's tough. It's tough. And then Chad McWhite says, "Fish the moment, best YouTube info on the net." Appreciate that, man. And then he says, "I got part time and fish 2 different series and tournaments. Johnny is gold to help put more fish in the boat." That's awesome, man. I'm glad that I can kind of help out some of the guys who are experienced at fishing, as well as the beginners. That's kind of the goal for my channel, because it's like, again, I don't know everything, but as long as I can share areas where I catch a 4-pounder, I feel like it can be helpful to anyone, even if it's guys who are, fishing for 20 years. And I learn a ton from your guys' comments and from fishing with other anglers. And so it's, not that I know everything, but, it's always just the more information you can get, the better fisherman you're going to be. And like I've kind of specialized in offshore fishing, which is something a lot of guys aren't as comfortable with. And so something that hopefully I can help improve you guys, help you guys improve on. But at the end of the day, I'm still learning. I'm still figuring stuff out every day. And so whenever I learn something new, I'm sharing it with you guys. And hopefully it's helping out, helping you guys catch more fish. And again, just appreciate you guys not, always tearing me up in the comments if I say something that may not be perfectly right with what you're thinking. Obviously, fish are different on every lake and the way you fish and all that. So you guys are amazing, like community, amazing people watching the videos. So again, thank you all so much. Then more stuff for the gloves. Anyways, I think that I'm probably going to close it up. It's been an hour and 35 minutes. I am very tired. Been on the grind making videos for a while now. Channel is growing like crazy. We passed over 20,000 subscribers. We're growing really fast, and a lot of awesome opportunities. I have the Bassmaster Classic coming up. Be looking for sponsorship and stuff there. If you guys know anyone who is potentially looking to sponsor someone who would be targeting a demographic like a fishing YouTube channel, or I'm going to be doing guided fishing lessons over time. The one-on-one fishing lessons, there's opportunity for a lot of branding, sponsorship, and stuff. So if you guys know anyone, if you're in the industry, shoot me like a personal message on Instagram, Facebook, stuff like that, so I can maybe try to set up some meetings at the Classic. That would be awesome. Just kind of help the channel grow. And then other than that, if you're just here to enjoy the content, really hope you enjoy. And if you're going to be at the Classic, I will be doing meetups all 3 days I'm there. So Friday, Saturday, Sunday. And I'm thinking one of the days on Saturday, I believe. I still need to figure out these details, but I'll be posting on all my social media about it. And I'll talk about it on the live stream, but I want to try to schedule like a meetup at like a pizza place or something. I'll try to book like a private room with like 20 people, and then we can all just order pizza together, hang out, and talk fishing and stuff. So I'll put a poll or something up on my Patreon and on my YouTube to see who would be interested in coming. So other than that, really enjoy everyone sticking around for an hour and a half on the stream, and appreciate all of the super chats today. Got a ton of super chats. We got one from Bruce Clayton, Zach White, Clint Hart, Michael Secrest, Zach White again, Ricky Payne, Austin Simpsons, and then Zach Harvey. So thank you all for the super chat donations. Really appreciate it. And again, thanks everyone for tuning in. So thank you so much, and I'll see you guys next week, same time, 7 p.m. Central Time, Tuesday night for another Fish the Moment live stream. Thanks, guys.